Well, Governor, thank you so much for taking the time today. I want to dig right into education. You have had quite the week there in your state with this education law that you helped usher in. This was a big priority for you. Can you tell us why?
Yeah, well, it started with COVID. First of all, I've always been a proponent of school choice. I believe parents should be able to decide what is the best environment for their child to be everything that they can be. But I tell you, COVID really put a fine point on that because it gave parents a front row seat to what was happening in their child's classroom, and a lot of them didn't like what they were seeing. A lot of parents, a lot of schools closed down for quite some time. We were a little bit different in Iowa. We had the majority of our kids in the classroom. I had some of our larger schools that didn't and fought me on it. And we actually ended up passing legislation to be the first state in the country that said no, parents will decide if their children are 100% online or 100% in the classroom. And then, we got sued even for that. And we had kids in our largest school district in Des Moines that were dropping out. Majority of them were on free and reduced lunch. Many of them were minority children. And when I looked at the opportunities that parents with the financial resources had, those kids, those families, that mom didn't have the choice of finding a different alternative, a different school that was open for their children. And I just fundamentally disagreed with that. And so we worked hard over the last 3 years to get this across the finish line. We made gains every year. We have a really strong homeschool program in the state of Iowa. We've seen tremendous growth in that. We had a tax credit for families that didn't have the means, but there's always more need than we had available. We were able to expand open enrollment, expand charter schools. And finally, this year, we got ESAs and universal school choice across the finish line.
So let's talk about the particulars of that. So there's an account essentially that's set up for every child, and the parents can make a decision what to do with that money. Take us through a little bit of how it works.
Okay, so we'll start it next year. We'll be at Universal in 3 years. That's probably, I think, the most aggressive school choice bill in the country. But watch, you've got a lot of other states that are going to be hopefully adopting similar language. But in the first year, all incoming kindergartners and all kids that are in public school have the option, that parent does, to take the 7,600, which is the per student cost. It's a state cost. It's the same for public and private. And they can transfer that to an educational savings account that can be used for tuition, for fees, for tutoring, for some qualified expenses. There's about 8 different things that they can use that for. And the first year, what we did this year that I think it was really helped make it successful is we allow kids that are in private school right now. We phase them in over 2 years, and third year we get to universal. So the first year it's based on need. So if the family's income is 300% or below of the federal poverty level, then they qualify for the 7,600 if they're currently in a private school. The next year it goes to 400% of FPL, and then by year 3, all students and all families are eligible for the ESA or the 7,600.
Wow. Wow. Now, this obviously is going to be really fascinating to watch how this plays out. You've had some people on the critical side. Randi Weingarten, the head of American Federation of Teachers, she likened the plan to, quote, a scheme to funnel taxpayer money to the wealthy few. She had a number of other things to say about political damage. What do you make of the reaction from some of the unions and others who are critical of this plan?
Well, I think it's a threat to their very existence, and they know that. And how ridiculous. This is the same individual that fought and fought and fought to keep our kids out of the classroom. I mean, it's as late as summer of 2021, they were still advocating for kids not to be in the classroom. They were putting stipulations on the Biden administration to get more money in order to even think about getting kids back in the classroom. I mean, they have led the the political divisive rhetoric to really take parents out of their child's education. So, when you don't actually pass it and you can put all that fear mongering to rest, then they can continue to throw out all these accusations that there are no data to support it whatsoever. And so the problem with what we've been able to do, and the problem, and the momentum that I believe this is going to drive across this country, is we will start to dispel all of that fear mongering, all of the stuff and the things that they put out there with actual data. And really, they like to say it's going to close down our public schools. There's no data out there to support that whatsoever. In fact, it's just the opposite. If you look at Florida, who's been doing some sort of school choice for some time, only about 3% of the student population has chosen to participate in a private school. Arizona is at 5%. I think in Iowa, the majority of parents will probably make the decision to stay with their public school system. But the bottom line is all parents, not just a few, should have the opportunity to choose and have that choice, whether it's faith-based or academic or whatever that may be. That parent, as long as it's an accredited private school, should have the opportunity to make that choice. So, it really, they're afraid. I think they see the momentum. They see that, I want to tell you, I said this earlier, I can't think of a person that's done more for school choice than Randi Weingarten and the crazy things that she's done. She's like our biggest advocate. She has mobilized parents across this country by the very way that she talks about things, by the woke agenda, the indoctrination, the sex education that they're bringing into the school system for our young kids. And, parents have had it. They want a quality education for their children. They want them to learn the basics, and then they will take care of the parenting at home. And they see how this is being eroded in our schools. And I had somebody say, well, where's the evidence? Are you sure this is even happening in Iowa? And I said, well, it is happening, but do we wait until it's happening before we take action, or do we get in front of it? And I believe this will elevate all of education, because you noticed in that press release that she put out, did you see anything about the children? Did you see anything mentioned about kids? No. It was all about money. It was all about politics. It was all about divisive destruction rhetoric, just rhetoric. But never does she mention the children.
Well, it's interesting because if the argument, which I think, and you've seen the press release, the argument seemed to be sort of in the vein of, well, why are they even messing with the system? The parents love the public schools. Why would they go after them? Which is an interesting argument to me, because if the parents do love the public schools, if that is what is being said, then even with school choice, if the majority of the parents stay, right? I mean, they have a choice then, right? So I found that argument interesting.
Yeah. Oh, I could not agree more. I mean, they kept saying that over and over at the public debate and on the floor debate when the bill was being going through the legislature. It either isn't a good public school or it's going to be decimated. They talked about how good the public schools were, but yet then they shouldn't fear, and even fear parents leaving if it is that good, to your point exactly. And as I talked to superintendents and principals, I traveled a lot, and I sat down with them and I said, it's critical that we have a strong public school system. You're the foundation of education, society, our economy, but this isn't a zero-sum game. Parents also should have the choice. I know I'm not going to change your mind, but tell me what we can do to help you be more competitive, to be able to provide a quality education to your students. And so we did incorporate some of those things into the bill. And I think that's what made it, stronger. But I did have one superintendent say, well, what if I have 100 families that walk out the door and make a decision to go to a private school? I said, well, then I think it's time for you to do an internal review, because something is wrong with the education that you're providing. If 100 families have picked up and are going someplace else, we need to figure out why is that happening, So, I mean, it helps us all be better. I had a superintendent when we passed expanded open enrollment that said, I don't like it. It was a larger school on the eastern side of the state, said, I don't like the law. I don't agree with the law, but it's law. And so I am going to do everything I can to make sure that this school district is the destination of choice. Wow. Isn't that the culture that we want to drive in education?
Right. That creates some competition. One thing on the critic side that they will often say is that, well, it's unfair that the private schools can make a decision on maybe not taking kids with special needs. I mean, this is the claim. It's unfair because the public schools have to take those students, and so they feel they end up in a situation that isn't equitable, I guess, because public schools have to take every kid, but the private schools can be more selective. Have you encountered that, and how do you respond when you hear that
Well,
argument?
I've heard it. I hear it all the time. What I'll tell you, I talk to a lot of the private school administrators. We walked through the process. But again, let's back up. It's the parent that's at that public school that's not happy with something. And so that parent is going to look at what some of their options are. They sit down with the administrator at that private school. A lot of times now, and this has changed in the last 5 years, they do a partnership with the public school. So the educator from a public school comes in and helps with some of the IEPs or the children with special needs. They'll have the AEA, which is another resource for these kids to help provide the wraparound services that they need. But the other component that they never want to admit or talk about at the public school is our children with an IEP or with special needs, they get additional weighting. So they get additional resources to help provide the wraparound services, the extra support that some of these kids may need. And our private schools don't have access to that additional funding. So they're able to sit down with a parent and say, based on the resources that we have, here's what we're able to do. We are partnering with a public school so we can bring them in. Let's see if that's something that works. But if it doesn't, then you can make a choice not to. But now with this bill and with the additional resources moving with the student, then maybe they'll be able to provide some of those additional wraparound services that even make it easier for them to provide for the students that are choosing that. But again, it's the parents that are deciding. It's not me. It's not the school board. It's not the superintendent. It's a parent that's going to weigh their options, and then they're going to do what's best for their child.
And there may be a need to reimagine, how public schools work depending on how this goes. Are certain schools going to take higher percentages of high need populations? There's a whole bunch of things that will be really interesting to watch
Yeah.
as this unfolds. But I did
Yep.
want to ask you, because this has been an area, obviously, of passion for you on your agenda. Parental rights in general, it's been a major issue. You were talking a little bit about this before. In light of that, and in light of this particular legislation, what is next on your agenda in this arena?
Well, just because of some of the things that we've seen with removing parents from the classroom. I mean, we have a large school in Iowa, in the Cedar Rapids area, Linn-Mar, that actually passed a policy that took parents out of the child's decision. Seventh graders, according to this policy, was able to decide if they changed their name or changed their gender or were transitioning, whether a parent would be made aware of that or not. And they did that final reading after a parent had an option to open enroll in another school. And so, which we changed by legislation because I was just unconscionable that they did that. But we make it clear that the parents are in charge. We take a look at some of the sex education that's being taught to our elementary kids. That'll be part of the parental rights bill. We don't parents should be the ones that should be teaching that to their children, not the schools. I think these are legitimate things. It's sad that we have to legislate that parents are the ones that are in charge of their child's education. I mean, where are we at as a society that I have to put that into a bill and run it through the chambers and hopefully get it to my desk? Full transparency about what's being taught. If a book or something gets removed and it goes on a website where all schools can see what is happening, and then they can that they can make it, that we're making it that the parent has to opt in, not opt out, for their child to have access to some of those things. So just transparency, making sure parents are in charge of their children's education, really making it clear that some of the things that are being taught, other than the basics, shouldn't be being taught in elementary. So it drops this week. I think it's a reflection of just the anger, angst, just anxiety from what I'm hearing from parents So hopefully it addresses some of those issues. But I want to tell you what we just did is the one thing that will truly make a difference. So last year we passed no critical race theory. We're not going to teach our students to hate this country. We're not going to judge people on the color of their skin. We're going to talk about their character. So we're not going to allow that. But they're very clever sometimes, so they change the way they talk about it, or they call it something different, or they disguise it as social emotional learning. I mean, they find ways around it. And so we can pass legislation to say that this is not acceptable, it won't happen, and there's consequences. But ultimately, what they understand, and this is Randy Weingartner, what she understands is money. That's all they talk about. And if we give parents the opportunity to leave that school and find a faith-based school or whatever they are looking for that they want for their child, ultimately, I think, they're going to have to rethink how and what they're educating our children with. So ultimately, this, I think, will be the biggest driver in impacting what our public schools are teaching and getting back to the bases and ultimately elevating education across the board.
Yeah, I mean, you're going to rethink what you're teaching if 100 families leave, right? I mean, as you were saying before, you're going to rethink what is going on in your classrooms. That's a really interesting take on that, and I'm very excited to see how this all plays out. I appreciate your time today, Governor. Thank you so much.
Thank you. It's been a real honor to talk to you. Watch it. We're going to see momentum across this country. I'm so excited about it.